Australia covers 7.69 million square kilometres, nearly the same landmass as the contiguous United States. It has 25 million people. The United States has 335 million. That difference is not a matter of history or policy or economics. It is a matter of physics. The reason 90% of Australia's interior is essentially uninhabitable, and why the people who do live there operate under a specific set of survival rules that most Australians in the cities have never needed to learn, comes down to a mountain range, a rain shadow, and a 64,900 cubic kilometre underground lake that most Australians have never heard of. Stay for the road train section, because the rules for sharing the road with a 200-ton vehicle that needs 1 full kilometre to stop are more specific and more counterintuitive than most people expect. The mountain that made the desert. The Great Dividing Range runs for 3,500 kilometres down the eastern edge of Australia, from the tip of Cape York in the north through Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria. It is ancient and relatively modest in elevation, averaging between 301,600 metres, with the highest point at Mount Kosciuszko reaching 2,228 metres. By the standards of the Himalayas or the Andes, it is not a dramatic mountain range. By the standards of atmospheric moisture dynamics, it is one of the most consequential geographic features in the southern hemisphere. Here is the mechanism. Moisture-laden air masses form over the Pacific Ocean to the east of Australia and are driven westward by the prevailing trade winds. When those air masses hit the Great Dividing Range, they are forced upward. As altitude increases, air temperature drops. Cooler air holds less moisture. The moisture condenses and falls as rain, almost entirely on the eastern coastal slopes, within a narrow strip between the mountains and the sea. The air mass crosses the ridge of the range and descends the western slope. As it descends, it warms. Warmer air holds more moisture. The warming air draws moisture in rather than releasing it, and the land below receives almost nothing. This is the rain shadow effect, and it operates continuously and reliably across every atmospheric cycle. The Great Dividing Range captures Pacific moisture for the coastal fringe and casts the entire interior into permanent, structural aridity. Not a drought. Not a temporary climate phase. A permanent atmospheric condition driven by the geometry of mountain and wind. The result is that 80 to 85% of Australia's landmass, everything west and inland of the range, experiences potential evapotranspiration rates that exceed annual rainfall. The air takes more moisture from the surface than the sky ever puts back. You can measure the aridity in specific numbers. In some parts of the interior, annual rainfall averages below 100 millimetres. The same areas see potential evaporation above 3,000 millimetres per year. The interior is not dry because of bad luck. It is dry because a mountain range 3,500 kilometres long is doing its job, and its job produces a continent-scale desert as a byproduct. The underground ocean. The interior of Australia is not entirely waterless. It is just that the water is underground, under enormous pressure, heated by geothermal energy from the depth of the earth, and accessible only by drilling through rock. The Great Artesian Basin underlies approximately 1.7 million square kilometres of Queensland, New South Wales, South Australia, and the Northern Territory, 22% of the Australian continent, a footprint considerably larger than the entire landmass of Iran. It holds approximately 64,900 cubic kilometres of water. For comparison, Lake Huron, the second largest of the Great Lakes, holds about 3,540 cubic kilometres. The Great Artesian Basin holds roughly 18 Lake Hurons underground. The geology is a layered sequence of permeable sandstone and impermeable shale deposited during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. Rainwater falling on the exposed sandstone formations along the western flanks of the Great Dividing Range infiltrates the rock and begins migrating slowly westward and downward, following the geology into deep, pressurised subbasins reaching up to 3,000 metres below the surface. At those depths, geothermal heat warms the water to between 30 and 100 degrees Celsius. The water is under artesian pressure. The weight of the overlying rock forces it upward, which means that when a drill reaches the aquifer, water rises to the surface without any pumping required. Before European settlement, this pressure discharged naturally through hydrothermal mound springs across the desert interior. These springs sustained isolated ecosystems, microhabitats of wetland vegetation and endemic species in the middle of arid scrubland, and served as critical nodes for Aboriginal trade routes across the continent. The springs were known, mapped through indigenous geographic knowledge, and visited systematically. Europeans found the basin by drilling in 1878. The Artesian pressure that had been sustaining those spring ecosystems for millennia was suddenly accessible at any point in the 1.7 million square kilometre footprint. By the 1890s and early 1900s, thousands of bores had been sunk across the interior. The Artesian pressure allowed pastoralists to establish cattle and sheep stations across millions of square kilometres of what would otherwise have been entirely uninhabitable desert scrubland. The whole interior pastoral economy, the cattle stations that cover enormous areas of Queensland, New South Wales, and South Australia, runs on water that fell as rain along the Great Dividing Range and has been migrating underground toward the centre of the continent for between 1,000 and 2 million years depending on where it is extracted. The 50,000-year management system. The popular image of the Australian interior as untouched wilderness, a landscape that looked the same when Europeans arrived as it did 10,000 years earlier, is historically wrong. The interior was actively managed. The management system was sophisticated, ecologically effective, and operated across the entire continent for at least 50,000 years. And its disruption is one of the reasons modern Australia experiences the wildfire conditions it does. The practice is called fire stick farming, or cultural burning. It was the primary land management tool of First Nations Australians across the interior, and it worked at a landscape scale. Rather than allowing fuel loads, dead grass, dry leaf litter, accumulated woody understory, to build up to the point where a summer lightning strike or an accidentally dropped coal could ignite a catastrophic high-intensity fire, First Nations land managers conducted regular, low-intensity burns during the cooler months of the late wet or early dry season. The timing was precise and deliberate. Burning when ambient temperatures were lower and soil moisture was higher meant the fire consumed the accumulated fuel at the surface without generating enough heat to damage the canopy or kill mature tree root systems. The result was a mosaic landscape, patches of open, recently burnt ground interspersed with patches at various stages of vegetation regrowth. This mosaic accomplished multiple practical goals simultaneously. The fuel load mitigation prevented the catastrophic megafires that characterise the modern Australian fire season. Without regular cool burns to reset the fuel accumulation, the interior builds up volatile biomass across consecutive years until a sufficiently hot, dry, and windy summer day produces a fire that runs for hundreds of kilometres, incinerates everything it crosses, and generates its own weather systems. The Black Summer fires of 2019 and 2020 burned through 18.6 million hectares and produced pyrocumulonimbus clouds, fire-generated thunderstorms, that created lightning strikes triggering new ignitions hundreds of kilometres from the original firefront. Cultural burning was, in part, a continental-scale fire prevention system operating through thousands of years of refined ecological observation. The mosaic it created also served as a game management system. Newly burnt patches, cleared of dense brush, rich in germinating seeds, attracted native herbivores. Kangaroos, wallabies, and emus moved to the fresh regrowth. Hunters knew where to find them. The recently burnt ground made burrowing animals like goannas visible and accessible. The landscape was not wilderness being passively experienced. It was an agricultural system operating through fire. Colonial displacements severed this management system almost immediately after 1788. In the absence of regular cultural burning, fuel loads built up across the continent over decades. The open woodlands and managed mosaics that European explorers described in their early journals began filling in with thick scrubland. The fire history of the continent since European settlement is, in significant part, the consequence of removing a 50,000-year land management system without replacing it. What happens if you break down? Subscribe before the road train section, because the rules for a 200-ton vehicle are specific and the physics are unforgiving. But first, what happens if your car breaks down in the Australian outback, and why the instinct most people would follow is the one most likely to kill them? The single greatest cause of death among stranded travellers in the Australian interior is dehydration caused by leaving a disabled vehicle to walk for help. This is the instinct. The car is broken. Help is not coming. Walking is doing something. Walking is how you survive in every other context where you are lost or stranded. In the Australian outback in summer, walking is how you die. During the summer months, October through April, shade temperatures in the interior regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius. Surface ground temperatures under direct sun can reach 70 degrees. Under these conditions, the human thermoregulatory system is running at maximum capacity. Sweat evaporates continuously, pulling heat from the skin, and the fluid loss exceeds 1 litre per hour under direct solar exposure. An average adult carrying a standard vehicle water supply and walking toward help that is 30 kilometres away will exhaust their body's cooling capacity long before they reach assistance. Acute heat exhaustion progresses to dehydration, to delirium, to hypothermia. The sequence is rapid. People have died within sight of roads. The protocol that saves lives in these situations is counterintuitive and absolute. Stay with the vehicle. A broken-down vehicle provides three things that walking cannot. The first is shade. The vehicle chassis creates a thermal microenvironment that dramatically reduces metabolic water loss compared to exposure. The second is visibility. Search and rescue aircraft can locate a stationary vehicle from altitude across flat, open terrain. A walking human is nearly invisible from the air against the scale of the landscape. The third is signaling capacity. If search aircraft pass overhead without spotting you, burning a vehicle tire produces a dense black smoke column visible for dozens of kilometers in every direction. The practical requirements for travel in the interior are specific. Standard mobile phone networks cover approximately 10% of the Australian landmass, the populated coastal fringe. In the interior, they are useless. Travelers need dedicated emergency hardware, a 406 MHz personal locator beacon, which transmits directly to rescue coordination centers via satellite, and ideally a satellite phone. Before departure, a detailed route itinerary must be lodged with a reliable emergency contact, with specific check-in times and a clear protocol for what the contact should do if a check-in is missed. The combination of staying with the vehicle, having a beacon, and having a filed itinerary is what determines whether a breakdown is an inconvenience or a fatality. The rules for road trains. The heavy freight network of the Australian interior runs on road trains, combinations of multiple trailers pulled by a single prime mover, regulated under the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. The scales are significant. A standard semi-trailer runs to about 19 to 21 meters. A B double, 2 trailers, runs to 26 meters. A Type 2 road train, up to 4 trailers connected by converter dollies, is permitted on public roads to a maximum length of 53.5 meters and can weigh up to 200 tons. There are specific roads rated for specific combinations. The longest and heaviest road trains operate on remote outback highways, often unsealed. They are the reason freight can reach remote stations and communities across a continent with insufficient rail coverage. They are also, for passenger vehicle drivers encountering them for the first time, genuinely hazardous if the physics are not understood. The first rule concerns stopping. A fully loaded Type 2 road train traveling at 90 km per hour requires over 1,000 meters, 1 full kilometer, to come to a complete stop. If a passenger vehicle cuts in front of a road train and then brakes suddenly, there is nothing the driver can do. The truck's momentum is absolute. The protocol for passenger vehicles is never to cut sharply in front of a road train, and when in doubt about following distance, to assume the gap is not enough and increase it. The second rule concerns overtaking. A 53.5 meter vehicle is approximately 35 car lengths long. Overtaking it while both vehicles are moving requires a clear forward visibility of at least 2 to 3 kilometers. On undulating outback roads where the horizon is not always visible, this is not always available. Before overtaking, drivers should contact the road train operator on UHF channel 40, the trucking frequency, to confirm that the road ahead is clear and get a visual confirmation from a driver who can see further than you can. The third rule concerns turbulence. When two vehicles pass each other at highway speed, the aerodynamic displacement of air creates a shockwave on both sides. For a 200-ton truck, this pressure wave is substantial enough to destabilize light vehicles and towed trailers. The protocol is to reduce speed slightly before the pass, maintain a firm grip on the steering wheel, and hold the lane without reacting to the initial pressure. Overcorrecting to the instinct to veer away from the truck is one of the most common causes of outback collision. The fourth rule concerns dust. On unsealed gravel roads, a passing road train raises a dust cloud that can completely eliminate forward visibility for 30 seconds or more. The protocol is to pull completely off the road surface, not onto the verge, but off the sealed or graded section entirely, and stop. Driving blind through a dust cloud on a road that may have oncoming traffic approaching in the same cloud is not a manageable risk. Stop. Wait. Wait longer than you think is necessary. Then check before moving. Australia's vast empty interior is not empty by accident. It is empty because a 3,500-kilometre mountain range captures all the Pacific moisture before it can reach the centre of the continent, leaving the interior in permanent atmospheric aridity. It is habitable at all only because an underground water system the size of Iran has been storing ancient rainfall under pressure for millions of years. It was managed and productive for 50,000 years by a land management system that Europeans ended within a generation of arriving. And it can be crossed by road today only by understanding the physics of the vehicles and the environment. because in the outback, the gap between a manageable situation and a fatal one is often a single wrong decision made quickly. If you want more of the Australian geography that the school curriculum doesn't fully cover, subscribe. We go deep every week.